Hello, everybody. This is Frank with Iron Age News at South Florida Conservative News Center. It is Saturday, April 4th, 9:12 a.m. And we are not getting on the bandwagon because we were on this for quite some time, but a little requiem for everybody's favorite Attorney General, Pam Bondi, and why this take may be different. So bear with us. There is a common explanation that is going around Washington right now that Pam Bondi fell because she was too loyal. She was too aligned with the Trump administration and too willing to carry out the evil Drumfler's agenda. It is a clean narrative. It is easy to understand, and it is almost entirely wrong. Pam didn't fall because of loyalty. She felt because loyalty without execution is worthless. So let's start where the damage really began. We're not going to worry about her back history with Trump and this and that and the other thing and why she was ill suited for the job in the first place. We'll just take it up where she really started to come apart. And that is where the damage really began, which is everyone's favorite, the Epstein case. So understand something. This wasn't just another investigation. This was the case, capital THE, the one that had been sitting, festering across multiple administrations, the one the public already believed was mishandled. And then Pam Bondi did something critical. She opened her mouth. She spoke about it. She was on record, kind of on video, talking about this thing in a non-professional environment. She referenced evidence. She implied there was depth. She suggested there was more, much more to uncover. And in Washington, that isn't commentary. That is a commitment. And what doesn't Washington do? Washington doesn't do commitment. So what followed from there? Nothing visual, nothing to be seen, no expansion beyond Ghislaine Maxwell, no cascade of follow-on prosecutions, no systematic exposure of networks, no reframing of Epstein as a multi-decade institutional failure, just silence. And that's the moment everything changed, because once you raise the expectations and fail to meet them, you don't get judged on what you did, you get judged on what you didn't do. And in a political situation now where the Democrats are seizing at anything to try to make a case for themselves getting elected in the midterm, boom, right? So zoom out, because Epstein wasn't the only issue. The broader question started to creep in. Where were the cases? This was an administration that came in with an expectation, whether stated or not, that the Department of Justice would act aggressively. It was going to expose corruption, bring major prosecutions. We had an entire Biden administration full of Senate hearings that exposed all kinds of criminal activity. It was supposed to shake loose a system people believed had gone stagnant, drain the swamp. Remember, drain the swamp? And that didn't happen. There were no defining, system shaping prosecutions done, no cases that forced a national reckoning. And this is where the defense usually comes in. DOJ had constraints. Yes, it does. Cases take time. Yes, they do. Evidence thresholds are high. These are all true. But here's the problem. The Department of Justice, as you watched under Obama, as you watched under Biden, has enormous power. It is a war machine when it wants to be, as you saw against the ex-president of the United States for 4 years. Grand juries, subpoenas, interagency coordination, the ability to build cases from public and internal intelligence. It wasn't a lack of tools. It was a lack of visible application. And in politics, perception of an action is indistinguishable from an action itself. Now, here's where the story gets more interesting. We'll take a step away from the Epstein issue, because it's not just about the cases that weren't brought, it's about the one that was. And that is the prosecution of Nicolas Maduro. Think about that for a second. Ignore the many conspiracies about the Epstein file. Nicolas Maduro, a sitting foreign head of state, charged with narco terrorism, drug trafficking, allegedly tied in with a state-enabled criminal network. He's got ties to the Chinese. He's selling property to the Iranians, right? That's not a small case. That is a generational case, the kind of case that would anchor an entire narrative about global crime networks and their impact on the United States. Totally justify what Trump did in Venezuela, totally justify what Trump will do in Cuba, totally justify what Trump is doing in Iran. And yet it disappeared. No expansion, no broader exposure, no sustained messaging, no effort to connect it to larger financial systems or logistic systems or geopolitical systems. And where's all the money, right? I'm running a multinational fucking drug ring. Where is the money and why am I not seizing it? You will hear in the news that the Iranians have money in England. There is an article that we did, 150 billion with a B in assets outside of the country of Iran that should be seized. All right. So the key point with this is even if Maduro knew more about networks, contacts, anything beyond the charges, it didn't matter because none of it was brought into the public domain. Not charged, not proven, not introduced, which means in real terms, it didn't exist. That is the failure, capital F. Not just missing opportunities, but failing to leverage the opportunities that were already in hand. At the same time, something else started to happen. There were smaller things, but important ones. There were moments where the department appeared to take credit for actions carried out by others. If you are a Floridian or have been here for a while, Bondi was taking credit for Coast Guard narcotic seizures. Well, that's Department of Justice. Coast Guard is under Department of Homeland Security, which would have been Kristi Noem when she could take a minute away from her vibrator collection, obviously. She would have taken credit for that. Bondi's taking credit for it where these weren't narcotics cases. This is interdiction. They're out there floating around in the ocean and they are looking for ships. That is not a case. There is a case after the fact, perhaps, right? So she also claimed, and you can look for it, influence over declining homicide rates, something largely driven by local and state factors, right? Now, on their own, they look minor, but together they are signaling something deeper, especially when you're working for a results-oriented man like Donald Trump. When leadership starts taking credit for outcomes it didn't generate, it tells you something. She needed to stay on the board or get on the board because Marco Rubio is running roughshod over everybody. Hegseth doing a lot of stuff. Scott Bessent out there really making the grade. And here's Pamsky taking advantage of the narcotics industry or lowering a homicide rate. You know, did she find the Lindbergh baby? No. Did she find out who killed OJ's wife? No. But this is what I'm saying. Leadership, and I'll say it again, starts claiming credit for outcomes it didn't generate. There aren't enough wins coming from inside the building. And in Washington, credibility is everything. You don't, it doesn't sound like it, but it is on certain things. And once it starts to slip, it doesn't come back. You know, if you're a known thief, you're a known thief. If you're a known whatever, you're a known whatever. Now, let's talk about the institution itself. And this is what we talked about prior to her taking over. The DOJ, Department of Justice, is not easy to change. Career prosecutors stay, culture persists, risk aversion dominates. No attorney general walks in and flips a switch. Pam Bondi, with not a lot of background in this type of thing, working under Governor Ron DeSantis, who pretty much beat those people onto the ground to do what he wanted to do, was walking into one of the most hostile work environments in the world next to the FBI as far as being a Republican trying to get anything done. The DOJ and FBI have been hand in hand working under Democratic rule for so long, and including the Bushes in that, that you would have to have purged that thing like Stalin. And she was not up to the task. Okay? Leadership had tools. It had assignments. You could have sent them all to, like when you saw Patel send all those people out of Washington, D.C. It's a reason for that. They're a power block. They got to go. They have Alaska has crime, right? Put somebody somewhere, Puerto Rico. Assignments, supervisors, task forces, priorities. You don't have to purge the system if you can't do it, but you can bend it. And that's the quiet failure here. There's no evidence that the system was meaningfully bent to the will of the attorney general, in which time it should have been prosecuting major crimes. Do you not think that the United States government's key people who allowed an open border policy that allowed for the rape, sexual assault, torture, and murder of hundreds of thousands of illegals up to and including the border area, somebody should have looked into that? Don't you think somebody should have looked into that? She could have made her career just kicking the shit out of Merrick Garland, but yet she does not. Okay. There's no evidence at all that she meaningfully put a dent in DOJ's culture. It remained what it had been, cautious, deliberate, and slow, which means the next guy inherits the same issue at a moment when it was expected to be something else entirely. It was supposed to go out and avenge the United States citizens against an occupying force, which was the Biden administration. And it did none of those things. And that brings you back to the central understanding. The media says this is about loyalty, and it was not about loyalty. Bondi was aligned, she was trusted, she was in position, but alignment without execution is politically irrelevant. You're going to see that in the Byron Johnson gubernatorial race, right? He was able to get Trump's, there you go, buddy thing. Byron has about two thoughts in mind: where's lunch and where's dinner? After that, he is going to be the worst governor outside of a Democrat that the state of Florida has probably had going back 25, 30 years. But like I said, alignment without execution is politically irrelevant. In Washington, you don't survive because you agree. You survive because you deliver for the man. So what actually happened wasn't one mistake. It was a pattern. The Epstein case raised the expectations without follow through. There were no major prosecutions. The historic case, the one you were going to go and drink and eat for free for the rest of your life, the Maduro case would have been to her what Giuliani had with the mafia. If you remember Giuliani prosecuting the mafia, a historic case was never leveraged. In the meantime, his defense people have had all kinds of time to do whatever they need. Evidence is being destroyed. If you notice, the president of Venezuela also had warrants out for her arrest, but we haven't moved on her because there's not enough incriminating testimony from Maduro. And the credibility is eroded. And eventually the gap between the expectation and outcome become too large to ignore. And so in the end, the lesson's simple. Power is not what you know. And everybody's going to have to start learning that, because they think, if you're out there looks maxing and doing things of that nature, that you're going to get powerful. It's not what you say. It's what you can prove, charge, and deliver. And on that measure, Pam Bondi came up very short. So that is our take, my take especially, on what went on there. And she did no service to the Trump administration. Trust me, she did no service to the Trump administration with her actions. The Democrats could have picked a better one, but they got a lot of good stuff out of Pam Bondi just by her inexperience and ineptitude. So there you have it. Have a good Saturday. We will be off tomorrow for Easter, and support Jade and Ivy, I guess. And that's all. Goodbye.